Picture this. You wake up one morning and the world around you is absolutely massive. Everything towers above you like skyscrapers, and you're about the size of a modern chicken. The air is thick and muggy, reeking of decay and wet soil. Your siblings are scrambling all over you, stepping on your head, and the competition for literally everything has already begun. Welcome to your first day of existence as a baby Giganotosaurus. And trust me, it's not going to get easier from here. Now, before we dive into this prehistoric nightmare, let me paint you the full picture of what you're dealing with. The Giganotosaurus was one of the largest land predators that ever lived, growing up to 43 feet long and weighing as much as 8 tons. But here's the kicker. They didn't start out that way. Every single one of these apex predators began life as a vulnerable, tiny creature in a world designed to kill them. And today, we're going to explore exactly why being born as one of these giants was actually a living hell. You see, most people think being a massive predator would be awesome. You imagine stomping around, terrorizing everything in sight, being the undisputed king of your domain. But that's only if you survive long enough to become that monster. The reality is that 99% of baby Giganotosaurus never made it past their first year. And the reasons why will absolutely shock you. So buckle up, because we're about to take a journey through one of the most brutal childhoods in natural history. By the end of this series, you'll understand why being born as a Giganotosaurus was less like winning the genetic lottery and more like being thrown into a gladiator arena while blindfolded. Let's start with day one, because your problems begin the moment you crack out of that shell. You emerge into a world where your own mother might accidentally step on you. She's a 40-foot-long killing machine, and you're a squeaking little morsel that barely weighs a few pounds. The size difference is so extreme that it's like a human trying to carefully walk around a field of ants while wearing combat boots. Sometimes she succeeds in not crushing you. Sometimes she doesn't. But let's say you survive that initial hazard. Your next challenge is immediate and relentless hunger. Your stomach feels like it's eating itself from the inside, and you're competing with dozens of siblings who are all just as desperate as you are. When Mom brings back chunks of meat from her latest kill, it becomes an absolute free-for-all. Imagine Black Friday shopping, except instead of fighting over electronics, you're fighting for survival itself. And losing means death. Your siblings aren't just competition, they're potential threats. The bigger ones will push you away from food, step on you, and sometimes even try to eat you if they get desperate enough. Cannibalism isn't uncommon among young Giganotosaurus, and your own brother or sister might become your executioner if resources get scarce enough. This isn't sibling rivalry. This is a battle royale where only the strongest, fastest, and most ruthless survive. And here's where it gets even worse. You can't just focus on competing with your siblings. While you're fighting over scraps of meat, the forest around you is crawling with creatures that see you as a perfect snack. Remember, you're living in Cretaceous South America, which was basically nature's version of a horror movie. Crocodilians lurk in every water source. Smaller predators patrol the underbrush looking for easy meals. And even the herbivores can crush you without breaking stride. Every single day is a constant state of paranoia. That rustling in the bushes could be a small mammal you might catch for dinner, or it could be a predator that's about to make you dinner. Those shadows moving between the trees might be harmless plant eaters, or they could be another family of carnivores marking their territory. You learn quickly that everything in this world falls into one of two categories: things that want to eat you and things that might accidentally kill you. But wait, there's more. Your own mother, who's supposed to be your protector, is also your biggest source of stress. She's not nurturing in any way that we'd recognize. She doesn't coddle you or comfort you when you're scared. Instead, she's constantly testing you, pushing you to become stronger, faster, more aggressive. If you show weakness, she might abandon you entirely. If you can't keep up during travel, she'll leave you behind without a second thought. This isn't cruelty. It's evolution in action. She knows that coddling weak offspring is a waste of energy that could be better spent on the strong ones who actually have a chance of surviving. So every interaction with Mom is essentially a performance evaluation where failure means death. Now let's talk about the learning curve, because unlike mammals, you don't have the luxury of a long, protected childhood to figure things out. You need to master complex hunting techniques while your brain is still developing. You have to learn to read tracks in mud, identify the scents of different prey species, understand wind patterns, master stealth movement, and develop lightning-fast reflexes. All of this while you're still growing and your body proportions are constantly changing. Imagine trying to learn to drive while your legs are getting longer every day. Your depth perception is shifting and your coordination is all over the place. Except instead of maybe denting a fender if you mess up, you starve to death or become something else's lunch. The forest itself is like a constantly shifting maze of death traps. Rivers that were shallow yesterday might be flooding today. Trees that provided cover last week might have fallen in a storm. Territories that were safe might now be claimed by a rival predator family. You're trying to build a mental map of your world, but that world is changing faster than you can adapt to it. And here's something that'll really blow your mind. You're not just learning to hunt. You're also learning to avoid being hunted by your own species. Adult Giganotosaurus are territorial and aggressive, and they don't make exceptions for juvenile families. If you accidentally aisles from wander into another adult's territory, you're not getting a warning or a chance to explain yourself. You're getting attacked by a creature that makes your mother look small. This creates an impossible situation. You need to explore and learn to survive. But exploration means risking encounters with creatures that can kill you instantly. You need to practice hunting noise, but making during practice might attract predators. You need to eat regularly to grow strong, but taking food requires risks that you killed. The psychological could get pressure is unimaginable. You're living in a constant state of fight or flight. Never the next threat will appear, knowing when. Your nervous system is perpetually flooded with stress hormones. Sleep becomes a luxury you can rarely afford because predators hunt at all hours. Even when you do manage to rest, you're sleeping with one eye open, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. But here's where it gets really interesting. Despite all these challenges, you're also developing into one of the most efficient killing machines the planet has ever seen. Every near-death experience is teaching you something valuable. Every failed hunt is making you smarter. Every encounter with a rival predator is building your combat instincts. Your body is growing at an incredible rate, adding mass and strength almost daily. Your senses are becoming razor sharp, tuned to detect the slightest movement or scent that might indicate prey or danger. Your reflexes are getting faster, your coordination more precise. You're becoming a living weapon, forged in the crucible of constant survival pressure. Yet even as you grow stronger, new challenges emerge. The larger you get, the more food you need, which means taking hunting bigger risks and more dangerous prey. The more successful you become as a hunter, the more likely you are to attract the attention of rival predators who see you as competition that needs to be eliminated. And this is just the beginning of your journey. We haven't even talked about the nightmare of adolescence, when you're too big to hide, but not big enough to fight adult rivals. We haven't discussed the brutal mating competitions, the challenges of raising your own offspring, or the constant threat of starvation during lean seasons. The territorial battles during your teenage years are where things get absolutely insane. You're now somewhere between 15 and 20 feet long, which sounds impressive until you realize that puts you in the most dangerous size category possible. You're too big to hide from threats, but still too small to challenge a full-grown adult. It's like being a high school student trying to survive in a maximum security prison. This is when you start encountering other juvenile Giganotosaurus, and let me tell you, these meetings are not friendly playdates. Every encounter becomes a test of dominance that could end in serious injury or death. You might think you're tough after surviving your childhood, but suddenly you're face to face with another predator who's just as desperate, just as hungry, and just as willing to do whatever it takes to claim the best hunting grounds. The fights are absolutely brutal. We're talking about creatures with bone-crushing jaws, razor-sharp claws, and absolutely no concept of mercy. When two teenage Giganotosaurus clash, the forest literally shakes. Trees get knocked down, the ground gets torn up, and the winner walks away scarred, while the loser might not walk away at all. But here's what makes this even more terrifying. You're not just fighting for territory anymore. You're fighting for your future survival. The prime hunting grounds are limited, and if you can't secure a good territory during this crucial period, you'll be pushed into marginal areas where prey is scarce, and competition is even more fierce. It's like a game of musical chairs, except the chairs are hunting territories and losing means starvation. Now, while you're dealing with these life-or-death territorial disputes, you're also facing a completely different kind of nightmare. The adult Giganotosaurus who see you as a threat that needs to be eliminated before you become too powerful. These aren't fair fights. These are execution attempts. A fully mature adult can weigh twice as much as you and has decades of combat experience. When they decide you need to go, your only option is to run and hope you're fast enough. The psychological pressure during this phase is overwhelming. Every day, you're making decisions that will determine whether you live or die. Do you challenge that slightly smaller rival for his territory, or do you wait and risk him growing stronger? Do you hunt in that rich area knowing an adult patrols it, or do you play it safe and potentially starve? Every choice is a calculated risk, and miscalculation means death. Your body is going through massive changes during this period too. You're adding hundreds of pounds of muscle and bone, but this growth isn't uniform or predictable. Some days your legs feel too long. Other days your head feels too heavy. Your center of gravity is constantly shifting, affecting your balance during hunts and fights. It's like trying to be a professional athlete while your body randomly changes proportions every few weeks. The hunger during this growth phase is indescribable. Your metabolism is working overtime to fuel your rapid development, which means you need to consume enormous quantities of meat just to maintain your current size, let alone continue growing. You're essentially running a caloric deficit every single day, and that constant hunger makes you desperate and prone to taking risks you shouldn't take. This to some truly horrifying desperation leads scenarios. You might find yourself stalking prey that's obviously too dangerous simply because you're too hungry to think clearly. You might challenge rivals you know you can't beat because hunger is making you irrational. You might even consider hunting in areas where you know adult Giganotosaurus patrol simply because the alternative is slowly starving to death. Speaking of starvation, let's talk about what happens when prey becomes scarce. During drought seasons or after major environmental disruptions, the herbivore populations crash, which means there's not enough food to support all the predators in an area. This triggers what can only be described as a prehistoric apocalypse scenario. Suddenly, every predator in your region becomes a competitor that needs to be eliminated. The normal territorial boundaries break down as desperate hunters push into each other's domains. The forest becomes a war zone where alliances mean nothing and survival is the only law. You might wake up to find 3 rival families moving into your territory, all of them as desperate and dangerous as you are. During these lean times, you're forced to expand your diet in ways that would have been unthinkable before. You start hunting smaller prey that barely provides enough nutrition to justify the energy spent catching it. You begin scavenging from kills made by other predators, which means risking confrontations with creatures who are already on edge from hunger. The stress of constant food insecurity does terrible things to your developing brain. You become hypervigilant, paranoid, and increasingly aggressive. Every sound in the forest makes you tense up. Every scent on the wind could signal either a potential meal or a deadly threat. Sleep becomes almost impossible because your hunger keeps you awake. And when you do manage to rest, nightmares of starvation haunt your dreams. But even if you manage to navigate the territorial battles and survive the lean seasons, you're still facing challenges that would break most creatures. The weather in Cretaceous South America is incredibly volatile. Massive storms can flood your territory overnight, forcing you to relocate or drown. Volcanic activity can fill the air with toxic gases and ash, making breathing difficult and hunting nearly impossible. These environmental disasters don't just threaten your immediate survival. They disrupt the entire ecosystem you depend on. Floods wash away the herbivore herds you've been tracking. Volcanic eruptions drive prey species to migrate hundreds of miles away. Forest fires destroy the cover you need for ambush hunting. You're constantly adapting to a world that seems determined to kill you through sheer unpredictability. And here's something that makes all of this even worse. You're doing it essentially alone. Unlike pack hunters who can rely on group cooperation, Giganotosaurus are largely solitary creatures. You can't call for backup when things go wrong. You can't share the burden of hunting with teammates. Every challenge you face by yourself, with nothing but your own strength, intelligence, and instincts to keep you alive. The isolation takes a psychological toll that's hard to overstate. Humans are social creatures, so we can barely imagine what it's like to go months or even years without meaningful contact with our own species. For a young Giganotosaurus, every encounter with another of your kind is either a fight or a potential prelude to a fight. There's no companionship, no emotional support, no shared experiences except violence and competition. This isolation becomes even more challenging when you start reaching sexual maturity. Suddenly, you're dealing with powerful new instincts and hormonal changes that you have no framework for understanding. Your body is telling you to seek out potential mates, but every member of your species you encounter sees you as either a rival to be eliminated or a threat to be avoided. The mating process itself is incredibly dangerous. When you finally do encounter a potential mate, you have to somehow communicate that you're interested in reproduction rather than combat, all while dealing with a creature who's just as large, just as powerful, and just as paranoid as you are. One wrong move, one misinterpreted signal, and what should be a romantic encounter becomes a death match. Even if you successfully navigate the courtship phase, your troubles are far from over. Now you have to help protect and provision a nest full of eggs, which makes you a target for every predator and scavenger in the area. You're essentially advertising your location to every creature that sees eggs as an easy meal, while simultaneously trying to gather enough food to sustain yourself and your mate. The responsibility of parenthood adds a whole new dimension of stress to your already overwhelming existence. You're not just responsible for your own survival anymore. You're responsible for the survival of your offspring and your mate. Every decision you make affects multiple lives. Every risk you take could leave your family vulnerable. Every mistake could result in the death of the next generation. But we're still not done exploring the nightmare of Giganotosaurus' existence. We haven't even touched on the diseases and parasites that plague these creatures, the injuries that never properly healed in a world without medical care, or the slow decline that eventually claimed even the most successful individuals. The story of being born as a Giganotosaurus is far from over, and the challenges we've discussed so far are just the beginning of a lifetime of struggle in one of the most hostile environments Earth has ever produced. The diseases and parasites alone would make your existence unbearable. Imagine dealing with internal worms that are literally eating you from the inside while you're trying to hunt for your next meal. These weren't just minor inconveniences. We're talking about parasites the size of garden snakes writhing through your digestive system, stealing nutrients that your rapidly growing body desperately needs. Your skin becomes a battleground for countless external parasites. Ticks the size of golf balls latch onto areas you can't reach, swelling with your blood until they're grotesquely engorged. Flies lay eggs in any open wound, and those eggs hatch into maggots that feast on your living flesh. You spend hours each day trying to scrape these parasites off against rough tree bark, but it's a losing battle. For every one you remove, 3 more take its place. But the parasites are nothing compared to the injuries you accumulate over years of violent encounters. Every fight leaves scars that never properly heal. That gash across your ribs from a rival's claws becomes infected, oozing pus and attracting more flies. The broken toe from that awkward landing during a hunt never sets correctly, leaving you with a permanent limp that affects your hunting ability. Without any form of medical care, even minor injuries can become death sentences. A small cut on your foot becomes infected, and the infection spreads up your leg. You develop a fever that makes thinking clearly impossible, just when you need your wits the most. You're burning up from the inside while still needing to hunt, fight, and survive in a world that shows no mercy to weakness. The accumulated damage takes a horrific toll on your body. Your joints ache constantly from years of high-impact collisions and brutal fights. Old fractures that healed improperly create chronic pain that never goes away. Your vision starts to deteriorate from repeated head trauma during territorial disputes. Your hearing becomes less acute after too many bone-rattling roars at close range. As you enter your prime years, you might think the worst is behind you. You're now a full-grown apex predator, 40 feet of muscle and fury that can take down almost anything in your path. But this is when the competition becomes absolutely savage. You're no longer fighting scared juveniles or desperate adolescents. Now, you're facing other fully mature adults who are just as powerful, just as experienced, and just as determined to hold their territory as you are. These aren't the chaotic brawls of your youth. Adult Giganotosaurus fights are calculated, strategic, and utterly ruthless. Your opponent has decades of combat experience and knows exactly how to exploit weaknesses. They've survived everything you've survived and more. When 2 apex predators clash at full strength, the devastation is beyond imagination. The psychological warfare begins long before the physical confrontation. You and your rival circle each other for days, sometimes weeks, testing boundaries and looking for signs of weakness. Every roar is a threat. Every movement is analyzed. You're playing a deadly game of chess where one wrong move results in your death. When the fight finally erupts, it's like a natural disaster. Trees are knocked down by your massive bodies slamming into them. The ground shakes with every impact. Blood spatters everything within 100-foot radius. You're using every ounce of strength, every dirty trick you've learned, every survival instinct you've developed over years of violence. But here's the terrifying reality. Even if you win these battles, you're slowly destroying yourself. Each victory comes at an enormous cost. You lose teeth that never grow back. You suffer injuries that permanently reduce your mobility. You expend energy reserves that take weeks to replenish. You're literally fighting yourself to death, one territorial dispute at a time. The constant stress of maintaining your territory is exhausting beyond belief. You can never truly relax because there's always another challenger on the horizon. Young adults are constantly testing your boundaries, looking for any sign that you're weakening. Older rivals who've lost their own territories are desperate to take yours. You're living in a state of perpetual warfare where peace is just the brief pause between battles. Your territory itself becomes both a blessing and a curse. Yes, it provides hunting grounds and resources, but it also makes you a target. Every successful hunt you make sends the scent of blood across miles of forest, advertising your presence to every predator in the region. Every roar you make to warn off intruders also tells potential challengers exactly where you are. The responsibility of defending such a large territory is overwhelming. You're constantly patrolling boundaries that stretch for dozens of miles, marking your scent on trees, leaving claw marks on rocks, and checking for signs of intrusion. It's like being a one-person army trying to defend a fortress the size of a small country. And just when you think you've mastered the art of territorial defense, the environment throws you another curveball. Climate patterns shift, and suddenly your territory is experiencing its worst drought in decades. The rivers that provided water for both you and your prey begin to dry up. The lush forests that supported large herbivore populations start to wither and die. During these environmental catastrophes, your carefully maintained territory becomes worthless almost overnight. The prey animals migrate to regions with better resources, leaving you with a vast expanse of empty hunting grounds. You're faced with an impossible choice. Abandon the territory you spent years fighting for, or stay and slowly starve to death. If you choose to abandon your territory and follow the migrating herds, you're essentially starting over from scratch. You're now a refugee in unfamiliar terrain, competing with established predators who know the local hunting spots and escape routes. You're the outsider trying to muscle your way into someone else's carefully balanced ecosystem. These migrations turn into prehistoric refugee crises. Dozens of displaced predators converge on the few remaining resource-rich areas, creating competition so intense that only the strongest and most adaptable survive. You might find yourself sharing hunting grounds with creatures you've never encountered before, each with their own hunting strategies and territorial behaviors. The social dynamics during these environmental disasters are absolutely brutal. Temporary alliances form and dissolve based purely on survival needs. You might find yourself cooperating with a rival one day to drive off a common threat, only to be fighting that same rival to the death the next day when resources become scarce. But even if you successfully navigate these environmental challenges and manage to establish yourself in a new territory, you're now dealing with the psychological trauma of losing everything you've worked for, the stress of constant displacement, the memory of territorial battles fought and lost, the uncertainty of never knowing if your current situation will last. It all takes a toll that's impossible to quantify. Your body starts showing signs of the decades of abuse you've subjected it to. Your once lightning-fast reflexes begin to slow down by fractions of a second. Tiny delays that mean the difference between catching prey and going hungry. Your bone-crushing bite force starts to diminish as your jaw muscles weaken with age. Your endurance decreases, forcing you to be more strategic about which battles you choose to fight. The younger generation of predators can sense these subtle changes in your capabilities. They become bolder in their challenges, more persistent in their territorial incursions. What once would have been a brief display of dominance now becomes a prolonged conflict as rivals test whether you still have the strength to back up your threats. Your hunting success rate begins to decline just when you need it most. The large, dangerous prey that once fell easily to your massive jaws now require more energy and risk to take down. You're forced to adapt your hunting strategies, targeting older or injured animals that are easier to catch but provide less nutrition. It's a gradual slide toward desperation that accelerates with each passing season. The isolation that defined your entire existence becomes even more pronounced as you age. The few potential mates in your region are either already claimed by stronger rivals or uninterested in partnering with a predator whose best years are clearly behind him. You watch from a distance as younger pairs establish territories and raise offspring, knowing that your own genetic legacy hangs in the balance. Sleep becomes increasingly elusive as chronic pain from old injuries keeps you awake through the night. Your body no longer recovers as quickly from exertion, and every hunt leaves you exhausted for days afterward. The constant low-level pain from arthritis in your joints makes every movement a reminder of your mortality. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of aging as a Giganotosaurus is the knowledge that your decline is irreversible and accelerating. Unlike humans, who can rely on medical care and social support systems, you're facing this deterioration completely alone. There's no retirement, no graceful exit from the competition. You either maintain your position through strength and violence, or you die. The younger predators aren't just competing with you. They're actively trying to hasten your demise. They understand that your weakness is their opportunity, and they show no mercy or respect for your decades of survival. Every encounter becomes a test of whether you still have enough fight left in you to remain relevant in this brutal ecosystem. Your territorial boundaries begin to shrink as you lose the ability to defend the outer edges of your domain. Piece by piece, your life's work is carved away by hungrier, stronger rivals. The prime hunting spots you once controlled become contested ground where you can no longer guarantee victory. The psychological impact of this gradual loss of dominance is devastating. Your identity as an apex predator, forged through decades of successful hunts and territorial victories, begins to crumble. You're forced to confront the reality that your reign of terror was always temporary, and that nature has no sentimentality for past achievements. Yet even in decline, you remain one of the most dangerous creatures on the planet. Your experience and cunning compensate for some of your physical limitations. You know the forest better than any newcomer, understand the subtle signs that indicate prey or danger, and possess a lifetime's worth of combat knowledge that younger rivals lack. This creates a terrifying dynamic where you're simultaneously vulnerable and deadly. Challengers know you're weakening, but they also know that cornering a desperate apex predator is potentially suicidal. You might not have the raw power you once possessed, but you have absolutely nothing left to lose, which makes you unpredictable and extremely dangerous. The final chapters of your existence become a desperate race against time and biology. Every successful hunt might be your last. Every territorial victory could be the one that finally breaks your body beyond repair. You're living on borrowed time in a world that has already moved on to the next generation of predators, and the only question remaining is whether you'll die fighting or fade away in obscurity. The brutal arithmetic of survival becomes crystal clear during your final years. You've reached that horrifying twilight zone where you're still technically an apex predator, but your body is betraying you in ways that make every day a potential death sentence. Your once razor-sharp senses are dulling just enough to matter. That split-second delay in hearing an approaching rival, that slightly blurred vision when tracking prey through dense undergrowth, that fraction of a second slower reaction time when danger erupts. These tiny degradations compound into massive disadvantages in a world where perfection is the minimum requirement for survival. The mathematics of predation shift against you in ways that would be almost comical if they weren't so terrifying. You now need to expend significantly more energy to catch the same prey that once fell easily to your jaws. A hunt that previously required a brief sprint and a single devastating bite now becomes an exhausting ordeal that leaves you gasping and vulnerable. You're burning through your energy reserves faster than you can replenish them, creating a deadly spiral that accelerates with each failed hunting attempt. Your digestive system, worn down by decades of processing massive quantities of raw meat and bone, begins to struggle with the very sustenance that kept you alive. Chronic inflammation in your gut makes absorbing nutrients increasingly difficult. Food that once provided days of energy now barely sustains you for hours. You find yourself in the impossible position of needing to hunt more frequently just when your hunting abilities are declining most rapidly. The younger generation of Giganotosaurus shows no mercy for your deteriorating condition. They circle like vultures, waiting for any sign of weakness that might give them an opening to claim your territory. Every interaction becomes a carefully choreographed dance of intimidation and counter-intimidation. You roar with all the authority you can muster, but your voice lacks the bone-shaking power that once sent rivals fleeing in terror. They notice, they remember, they plan. These ambitious youngsters employ tactics that are both cunning and ruthless. They don't challenge you directly to a fight they might lose. Instead, they engage in psychological warfare designed to exhaust your remaining resources. They hunt just outside your territorial boundaries, forcing you to patrol constantly. They leave scent markers that require you to travel miles to overmark with your own. They create false alarms that keep you on high alert, draining your energy reserves through constant vigilance. The stress of maintaining your facade of strength while your body systematically fails is overwhelming. You develop what can only be described as prehistoric anxiety disorder. Every sound at the forest triggers a stress response that floods your system with hormones your aging body can no longer efficiently process. Your heart pounds irregularly. Your breathing becomes labored even during rest. Sleep, already interrupted by chronic pain, becomes even more elusive as paranoia keeps your mind racing through endless scenarios of potential threats. Your territory, once a source of pride and security, transforms into an increasingly impossible burden. The boundaries you've defended for decades now feel like the walls of a prison. You know every tree, every rock formation, every water source within your domain, but that intimate knowledge comes with the crushing realization that you're trapped. Leaving means certain death in unfamiliar territory. Staying means slowly losing ground to rivals who grow stronger while you grow weaker. The seasonal changes that once provided natural rhythms to your existence now become existential crises. Winter brings challenges that your younger self handled with ease, but that now threaten to end your story permanently. The cold seeps into your arthritic joints, making movement agony. Prey becomes scarce just when you need more calories to maintain your body temperature. Rivers freeze over, forcing you to travel dangerous distances for water, while competing with desperate herbivores and other predators for access to the few remaining liquid sources. During these harsh winters, you're forced to make compromises that would have been unthinkable in your prime. You begin scavenging more frequently, following the scent of carrion left by more successful predators. The humiliation of feeding on scraps is nothing compared to the very real danger of approaching carcasses that might still be claimed by their original killers. You find yourself in feeding hierarchies where you're no longer at the top, waiting your turn like a common scavenger. The spring thaw brings its own unique horrors. Your territory, weakened by your reduced patrols during winter, has been systematically invaded by rivals who use the harsh season to establish footholds in your domain. You emerge from winter survival mode to discover that your life's work has been partially dismantled by opportunistic competitors who correctly calculated that you lacked the resources to maintain your boundaries during the lean months. Reclaiming lost territory requires energy expenditure that you can barely afford. Each confrontation with an intruder becomes a potentially fatal gamble. You might successfully drive off a challenger, but the effort leaves you so exhausted that you're vulnerable to the next threat. You're fighting a war of attrition that you cannot win, defending an empire that shrinks a little more with each victory that feels increasingly hollow. Your hunting strategies undergo radical changes born of pure desperation. The ambush tactics that served you well throughout your life become increasingly unreliable as your patience wavers and your ability to remain perfectly still for hours diminishes. You begin attempting more risky hunting approaches, targeting prey in dangerous locations or during daylight hours when you're more visible to both your quarry and potential rivals. These desperate hunting attempts lead to injuries that your aging body cannot handle. A mistimed leap results in a badly sprained joint that never fully heals. A desperate lunge at escaping prey sends you crashing into a tree with enough force to crack ribs that will ache for the rest of your shortened life. Each injury compounds the others, creating a cascade of physical limitations that make the next hunt even more challenging. The psychological impact of repeated hunting failures cannot be overstated. Your identity as an apex predator, forged through decades of successful kills, begins to fracture under the weight of mounting evidence that you're no longer the dominant force you once were. Self-doubt creeps in during crucial moments of hunts, causing hesitation that allows prey to escape. The confidence that once made you unstoppable becomes a distant memory, replaced by the crushing awareness of your own mortality. Your social interactions, already limited by your solitary nature, become even more fraught with tension and danger. The few encounters you have with potential mates end in rejection or violence as younger, stronger males consistently outcompete you for breeding opportunities. The biological imperative to pass on your genes becomes a source of torment as you watch your genetic legacy slip away with each passing mating season. Even your relationship with your own offspring, if you were fortunate enough to have any, becomes complicated by the harsh realities of natural selection. Your grown children, now competitors in their own right, show no familial loyalty when territorial boundaries overlap. They understand, as you once did, that sentimentality is a luxury that nature cannot afford. If your territory contains resources they need, they will challenge you for it regardless of your biological connection. The forest itself seems to conspire against your continued existence. Familiar landmarks disappear as storms topple ancient trees you've used for navigation. Water sources dry up or change course, forcing you to venture into unfamiliar areas where you lack the intimate knowledge that once gave you advantages over competitors. The very environment that shaped you into an apex predator becomes increasingly alien and hostile. Your sensory world begins to collapse in ways that make survival exponentially more difficult. Your once acute sense of smell, crucial for tracking prey and detecting rivals, becomes unreliable. Scent trails that should be obvious fade into background noise. The subtle chemical signatures that once told you everything about potential threats or opportunities become indecipherable. You're losing your primary means of gathering information about your environment just when accurate intelligence is most critical for survival. Vision problems compound the sensory decline. Objects at distance become blurry, making it difficult to assess whether that movement in the trees represents prey, predator, or merely swaying branches. Your depth perception suffers, causing miscalculations during hunts that result in embarrassing failures and potential injuries. Night vision, never your strongest sense, deteriorates to the point where darkness becomes genuinely dangerous rather than merely inconvenient. The cumulative effect of these sensory losses is a growing sense of disconnection from the world around you. You begin to feel like a ghost haunting your own territory, present but increasingly irrelevant to the ecosystem that once revolved around your presence. Other creatures, sensing your diminished capabilities, lose their instinctive fear of you. Prey animals become bolder, taking risks they never would have considered during your prime. Scavengers approach your kills more aggressively, sometimes even challenging you directly for carcasses you've worked hard to bring down. Your sleep patterns become increasingly disrupted as your body struggles to find comfortable positions that don't aggravate your numerous injuries and arthritic joints. The restorative sleep that once allowed you to recover from hunts and battles becomes fragmented and unsatisfying. You find yourself dozing fitfully during daylight hours, leaving you vulnerable to attack, while lying awake in agony during the safer darkness when you should be resting. The chronic pain becomes a constant companion that colors every aspect of your existence. Sharp shooting pains from old fractures interrupt your concentration during crucial moments of hunts. Dull aches from arthritic joints make every step a reminder of your physical decline. Muscle spasms from overcompensating for injured limbs create new problems even as you try to adapt to existing limitations. You develop a peculiar relationship with pain, learning to distinguish between the familiar aches you can ignore and the sharp warnings that signal new damage. Your digestive system, stressed by decades of consuming prey that was often partially rotten or contaminated, begins to fail in ways that threaten your survival more directly than any external predator. Chronic inflammation in your stomach makes it difficult to process the large quantities of meat you need to maintain your massive body. Food poisoning from questionable carrion becomes more likely and more dangerous as your immune system weakens. You find yourself caught in a terrible cycle where you need more nutrition to combat your declining health. But your declining health makes it harder to obtain and process that nutrition. The territorial boundaries that once seemed so solid and permanent begin to shift in ways that reflect your diminished ability to defend them. Younger rivals probe deeper into your domain with each passing week, testing your response times and commitment to defending marginal areas. You're forced to make strategic retreats that would have been unthinkable in your prime, abandoning outlying hunting grounds to concentrate your limited energy on protecting your core territory. These boundary adjustments create psychological trauma that goes beyond simple territorial loss. Each retreat represents an acknowledgement of weakness, a public admission that you're no longer capable of maintaining the domain you've spent your entire adult life building. The mental mapping of your territory, carved into your consciousness through years of patrol and defense, becomes increasingly obsolete as you lose control over familiar landmarks and hunting spots. Your interactions with the environment itself become more fraught with danger as your physical capabilities decline. River crossings that once presented no challenge now become potentially fatal obstacles. Your weakened swimming ability means that swift currents could sweep you downstream into unfamiliar territory or worse. Rocky terrain that you once navigated with confidence becomes treacherous as your balance and coordination deteriorate. Even familiar paths through your territory present new hazards as your reduced agility makes it harder to avoid obstacles or recover from missteps. The weather, always a factor in your survival calculations, becomes increasingly hostile as your ability to adapt diminishes. Heat exhaustion strikes more quickly during summer months as your body struggles to regulate temperature effectively. Cold snaps that you once endured with minimal discomfort now penetrate deeply into your arthritic joints, leaving you stiff and vulnerable for hours after temperatures begin to rise. Storms that previously represented minor inconveniences now pose genuine threats as your reduced mobility makes finding adequate shelter more challenging. Your relationship with time itself undergoes a fundamental transformation as the reality of your mortality becomes impossible to ignore. The future, once an endless expanse of hunting seasons and territorial defenses, contracts to a series of immediate survival challenges. Long-term planning becomes irrelevant when you're uncertain whether you'll survive the next winter or the next territorial challenge. You begin to live entirely in the present moment, not out of any philosophical choice, but because the present moment contains enough threats to occupy your full attention. The gradual loss of your position at the apex of the food chain creates a psychological vertigo that's difficult to describe. For decades, you've been the creature that other animals flee from, the predator whose very presence reshapes the behavior of everything in your territory. Now, you find yourself increasingly looking over your shoulder, checking for threats, calculating escape routes. The hunter becomes the hunted in ways both subtle and profound as younger, stronger predators begin to view you not as a rival to be respected, but as a potential target to be eliminated. Your legacy, if such a concept can be applied to a solitary predator, becomes increasingly uncertain. The territorial boundaries you've maintained, the hunting grounds you've cleared of competitors, the complex ecosystem relationships you've shaped through decades of predation, all of this hangs in the balance as your ability to maintain control diminishes. You begin to understand that your death will not be a peaceful fade into obscurity, but rather a violent transfer of power that will reshape the entire territorial structure of your region. The approaching endgame of your existence becomes a race between various forms of decline, each potentially fatal in its own right. Will chronic starvation claim you first as your hunting success rate drops below sustainable levels? Will a territorial challenger deliver the killing blow in a fight you can no longer avoid or win? Will accumulated injuries and diseases finally overwhelm your body's ability to function? Or will environmental challenges like harsh weather or habitat changes prove to be the final straw that breaks your already strained survival capabilities? As your story nears its inevitable conclusion, the forest around you continues to pulse with life and death, predation and survival, the eternal cycles that have shaped this ecosystem for millions of years. New generations of Giganotosaurus are being born into the same hostile world that once welcomed you with hunger, violence, and the promise of either evolutionary success or extinction. The wheel turns, indifferent to individual suffering, focused only on the broader patterns of adaptation and survival that define life on this ancient, unforgiving planet. Your final chapters are being written in blood, exhaustion, and the slow erosion of everything that once defined your existence as one of Earth's most formidable predators. The question is no longer whether you'll survive, but how long you can postpone the inevitable, and what kind of ending awaits a creature whose entire life has been defined by violence, competition, and the relentless pursuit of survival in a world that shows mercy to no one. The irony of your situation becomes crystal clear during these twilight years. You've spent your entire existence fighting to reach the top of the food chain, only to discover that staying there is infinitely harder than getting there. Every advantage you've earned through decades of violence and cunning is slowly being stripped away by the relentless march of time. Your massive frame, once your greatest weapon, now feels like a prison that requires enormous amounts of fuel to maintain while becoming increasingly difficult to maneuver. The energy economics of your existence reach a breaking point that defies all logic. You need roughly 800 pounds of fresh meat per week just to maintain your current body weight. But your hunting success rate has plummeted to maybe 1 kill every 10 days, if you're lucky. The mathematics are brutal and unforgiving. You're burning through your fat reserves and muscle mass simultaneously, creating a downward spiral that accelerates with each failed hunting attempt. Your once legendary bite force, capable of crushing the spines of massive herbivores, begins to weaken in ways that fundamentally alter your hunting strategies. Those bone-shattering jaws that could deliver 12 tons of pressure per square inch now struggle to maintain even half that power. Prey that should have died instantly from your bite instead manages to escape with injuries that would have been fatal wounds in your prime. You find yourself in prolonged struggles with creatures that once would have been dispatched with a single snap of your jaws. The psychological impact of these failed kills creates a feedback loop of diminishing confidence that makes each subsequent hunt even more challenging. You begin second-guessing your instincts, hesitating at crucial moments when decisive action is required. That split second of doubt allows prey to escape, or worse yet, to inflict injuries on you during their desperate attempts to break free from your weakening grip. Your territorial patrol routes, once completed with mechanical efficiency, become grueling ordeals that leave you exhausted for days afterward. The familiar paths that you could once traverse in hours now require entire days to complete. Rest stops become more frequent and longer as your endurance fails. You find yourself making strategic decisions about which boundaries to patrol and which to abandon, essentially conceding portions of your life's work to avoid total collapse. The scent marking that once proclaimed your dominance across dozens of square miles becomes increasingly sporadic and weak. Your scent glands, like everything else in your aging body, produce less potent chemical signatures. Rivals can detect this decline in the strength and frequency of your territorial markers. They interpret these subtle changes correctly as signs that your grip on power is loosening, and they respond by pushing deeper into areas that were once absolutely forbidden. Young challengers begin employing tactics specifically designed to exploit your physical limitations. They force confrontations during the hottest parts of the day when your overheating problems are most severe. They choose battle locations in dense forest where your reduced agility puts you at a disadvantage. They engage in hit-and-run attacks that exhaust your limited energy reserves while avoiding the direct confrontations where your experience might still give you an edge. Your sleep cycles become increasingly chaotic as chronic pain makes rest nearly impossible. The few hours of sleep you manage to steal are fitful and interrupted by muscle spasms, joint pain, and the constant low-level anxiety of knowing that predators might be approaching while you're vulnerable. Sleep deprivation compounds all your other problems, making your reflexes even slower and your judgment even more impaired. The forest itself seems to be reclaiming territories you once controlled absolutely. Vegetation grows thicker along paths you can no longer patrol regularly. Prey animals lose their instinctive fear of areas that were once synonymous with death. Water sources you've guarded jealously for decades become communal gathering spots where herbivores drink without the paralyzing terror that your presence once inspired. Your hunting grounds undergo a fundamental transformation as your reduced activity allows prey populations to redistribute themselves. The careful balance you maintained between predation pressure and prey availability collapses. Herbivores move into areas they avoided for years, while simultaneously abandoning regions where your declining hunting success means they're no longer at significant risk. The seasonal migrations that once brought predictable waves of prey through your territory become increasingly irrelevant as your ability to capitalize on these opportunities diminishes. You watch massive herds pass through your domain, knowing that you lack the strength and speed necessary to bring down even the most vulnerable members. The frustration of being surrounded by potential food that might as well be on another planet creates a psychological torment that gnaws at you constantly. Your digestive efficiency continues its relentless decline, meaning that even when you do manage to make a kill, you extract less nutritional value from each pound of meat consumed. Your stomach acid production decreases, making it harder to break down tough muscle fibers and bone fragments. Your intestinal absorption becomes less effective, allowing crucial nutrients to pass through your system unused. You're literally starving even while eating, a biological paradox that accelerates your physical decline. The injuries you've accumulated over decades of violence begin interacting with each other in ways that create cascading failures throughout your body. That old shoulder injury affects your gait, which puts extra stress on your hip joints, which creates compensatory movement patterns that strain your spine, which affects your neck flexibility, which reduces your ability to deliver effective bite attacks. Your body becomes a complex system of interconnected weaknesses, where each problem makes every other problem worse. Your immune system, weakened by chronic stress and malnutrition, becomes increasingly unable to fight off the constant assault of parasites, bacteria, and viruses that plague all wild animals. Minor infections that your younger self would have shrugged off become serious health crises. Wounds that once healed quickly now fester for weeks, draining your energy and making you vulnerable to secondary infections. The hierarchy of predators in your region undergoes a fundamental restructuring as news of your decline spreads through the complex communication networks that exist between different species. Scavengers become bolder in their approaches to your kills. Medium-sized predators begin venturing into territories they once avoided completely. Even some of the larger herbivores lose their instinctive flight responses when they encounter your scent, correctly calculating that you no longer represent the existential threat you once posed. Your relationship with environmental challenges transforms from manageable obstacles to potentially fatal encounters. River crossings that once presented minor inconveniences now become life-or-death gambles as your swimming strength fails. Rocky terrain, where you once moved with confidence, becomes treacherous as your balance deteriorates. Even familiar hunting grounds present new dangers as your reduced mobility makes it harder to navigate obstacles or escape if cornered. The psychological warfare employed by younger rivals becomes increasingly sophisticated as they recognize your vulnerabilities and exploit them ruthlessly. They time their challenges to coincide with periods when you're most likely to be exhausted or injured. They use coordinated harassment tactics that force you to expend energy defending multiple fronts simultaneously. They've studied your movement patterns and know exactly when and where you're most vulnerable to attack. Your sensory decline accelerates in ways that make the forest increasingly alien and dangerous. Sounds that once provided crucial information about approaching threats or fleeing prey become indistinguishable background noise. Your ability to track scent trails deteriorates to the point where you sometimes lose track of your own territorial boundaries. Visual problems make it difficult to distinguish between potential prey and potential threats until they're dangerously close. The social dynamics of your region shift as other apex predators recognize that your territory may soon be available for conquest. Alliances form between rivals who were previously enemies. United by their shared interest in claiming pieces of your domain once you're no longer able to defend it. You begin to detect the scent signatures of multiple competitors in areas where single challengers once tested your boundaries. Your hunting techniques undergo radical adaptations born of pure desperation. The patient ambush strategies that served you well throughout your life become impossible to maintain as your ability to remain motionless for hours disappears. You're forced to attempt more aggressive hunting approaches that require energy expenditures you can barely afford. These risky tactics result in more frequent injuries and an even lower success rate than your traditional methods. The mathematical reality of your situation becomes undeniable as you enter what can only be described as an accelerating death spiral. Each failed hunt makes you weaker, which makes the next hunt even more likely to fail. Each territorial retreat makes you appear more vulnerable, which encourages more aggressive challenges from competitors. Each injury takes longer to heal and heals less completely, making you more susceptible to the next injury. The various systems keeping you alive begin failing simultaneously, creating a cascade of problems that your aging body cannot possibly address. Your final hunting grounds shrink to a small core area where you can still maintain some semblance of territorial control. This last refuge becomes both sanctuary and prison, offering minimal safety while providing insufficient resources to sustain your massive body. You're trapped in an area too small to support your needs, but lacking the strength to expand into territories controlled by younger, stronger rivals. The environmental pressures that shaped your species for millions of years continue their relentless work, indifferent to your individual struggle. Drought seasons become existential crises as your reduced mobility makes it impossible to follow prey migrations to better watered regions. Storm systems that once represented minor inconveniences now pose genuine threats to your survival as your ability to find adequate shelter diminishes. Your digestive system reaches a point of near total failure where even the softest meat becomes difficult to process. Chronic inflammation in your stomach creates constant pain that interferes with your ability to focus during hunts. Your liver, stressed by decades of processing toxins from partially rotten carrion, begins showing signs of serious dysfunction. Your kidneys struggle to filter waste products from your blood, leading to a buildup of toxins that affects your cognitive function. The realization dawns with crystalline clarity that you've entered the final phase of your existence. Every sunrise might be your last. Every hunt could be the one where you finally lack the strength to return to your den. Every territorial challenge might be the confrontation that finally breaks your battered body beyond repair. You exist now in a perpetual state of borrowed time, where each day survived as both a victory and a postponement of an inevitable defeat. Your legacy hangs in the balance as competitors circle like vultures, waiting for the moment when your defenses finally collapse completely. The territorial boundaries you've maintained for decades will be redrawn within hours of your death. The hunting grounds you've shaped through years of selective predation will be redistributed among survivors who had no part in creating the ecosystem balance you've maintained. Your genetic contribution to future generations depends entirely on offspring you may never have had the opportunity to produce. The forest continues its ancient rhythms around your declining form, indifferent to individual suffering, but relentlessly focused on the broader patterns of evolution and natural selection that have shaped this ecosystem for millions of years. New predators are being born into the same hostile world that once welcomed you with violence and the promise of either dominance or extinction. The cycle that began with your own desperate emergence from a fragile eggshell approaches its inevitable conclusion in a story written in blood, exhaustion, and the gradual erosion of everything that once made you one of Earth's most formidable killing machines. Your final chapters unfold against a backdrop of unrelenting natural selection, where mercy is a concept that evolution cannot afford, and sentimentality is a luxury that nature has never recognized. The question is no longer whether you'll survive the challenges ahead, but rather how many more sunrises you'll witness before the forest finally claims its due from a creature whose entire existence has been defined by the brutal mathematics of predation in a world that shows compassion to absolutely no one. The brutal mathematics of your decline reach their logical conclusion as your body enters what can only be described as systematic organ failure. Your once mighty heart, strained by decades of explosive combat and high-stress hunting, begins developing irregular rhythms that leave you gasping for breath at the most inopportune moments. During what should be routine territorial patrols, you find yourself stopping every few hundred yards, chest heaving, as your cardiovascular system struggles to pump blood through your massive frame. Your liver, poisoned by years of consuming questionable carrion and stressed by the constant flood of stress hormones, starts failing in ways that poison your entire system. The yellowing of your eyes becomes noticeable even to potential prey, who recognize these visual cues as signs of weakness. Toxins that your liver once filtered efficiently now circulate through your bloodstream, affecting your cognitive function and making the split-second decisions required for successful hunting increasingly difficult. The kidney dysfunction that began as a minor inconvenience escalates into a life-threatening crisis. Your body's inability to properly filter waste products creates a cascade of problems that affect every other system. Fluid retention makes your joints even more painful and reduces your mobility further. The buildup of toxins in your blood creates a constant state of nausea that makes eating difficult, even when you manage to make a successful kill. Your respiratory system, damaged by years of inhaling volcanic ash, smoke from forest fires, and the general particulate matter that fills the air in your prehistoric environment, begin showing signs of serious compromise. What once were minor breathing difficulties during exertion become major obstacles to basic survival. The simple act of roaring to warn off territorial intruders leaves you wheezing and vulnerable for minutes afterward. The neurological effects of your systemic decline become increasingly apparent as your brain struggles to function with reduced oxygen and increased toxin levels. Your reaction times, already slowed by age, become dangerously delayed. Visual processing problems make it difficult to track moving prey or assess the intentions of approaching rivals. Memory issues cause you to forget the locations of territorial markers or the timing of prey migration patterns that once guided your hunting strategies. Your endocrine system, the complex network of glands that once regulated everything from your growth to your territorial aggression, begins producing erratic hormone levels that wreak havoc on your remaining capabilities. Adrenaline surges become unpredictable, sometimes flooding your system when you need to remain calm, other times failing to activate when mortal danger requires immediate action. Your stress response becomes so dysregulated that even minor threats trigger overwhelming physiological reactions that leave you exhausted. The muscle wasting that began subtly months ago accelerates into visible atrophy that changes your entire body profile. Your once massive shoulders become noticeably smaller. Your powerful haunches lose their intimidating bulk. Even your massive skull seems to shrink as the muscles that powered your bone-crushing bite begin deteriorating. Potential challengers can observe these changes from safe distances, calculating the optimal timing for their final assault on your territory. Your skeletal system, weakened by years of high-impact collisions and poor nutrition, begins showing signs of serious structural compromise. Hairline fractures that never properly healed become full brakes under stresses that your younger self would have handled easily. Your spine, curved from years of compensating for various injuries, develops compression problems that affect your ability to hold your head high enough to maintain proper sight lines during hunts. The integumentary system that once protected you from environmental hazards begins failing in ways that make every day a potential crisis. Your skin loses its elasticity and becomes more susceptible to cuts and punctures. Minor scrapes that once healed quickly become infected wounds that drain your energy and attract parasites. Your natural camouflage, dependent on healthy skin pigmentation, becomes patchy and ineffective. So there you have it, the complete, unfiltered nightmare of what it actually meant to be born as a Giganotosaurus. From that first terrifying moment when you cracked out of your shell to the inevitable decline that claimed even the most successful individuals, every single day was a brutal fight for survival in a world that showed absolutely no mercy. These weren't the majestic kings of their domain that popular media makes them out to be. They were desperate, constantly stressed, perpetually hungry creatures living in a state of permanent warfare against everything around them, including their own bodies. The next time you see a Giganotosaurus portrayed as some kind of prehistoric paradise, remember this story and the mathematical reality that 90